The Rosicrucian path is the journey of the mystic. Few souls brave it at any single time. Yet, it is this internal voyage that has rewarded many of our greatest minds with the ability to enrich the world. But it is a pilgrimage each individual must travel in their own time, for it reveals the path of knowing. It transcends time and space. This path of the Rosicrucian reveals higher truths for personal evolution. You are invited to witness its sacred history. Though any forensic evidence is difficult to contextualize, assuming the inheritance of Atlantean knowledge by the Egyptians, it becomes easier to track the historical transmission of information as the amalgamation of Egyptian and Greek influence, which persists in several important mystery schools that later emerged, and have contributed to what we know today as the Rosicrucian Order. In 1929, H. Spencer Lewis, first imperator of the Rosicrucian Order Amorc, wrote a remarkable description of the Essenes as part of his book, The Mystical Life of Jesus, 18 years before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Lewis's work was one of the inspirations of the modern Essene movement. In order to understand the relevance and context of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we must revisit the mystical Essene tradition. It is important to note that even Jesus himself is believed by many to have been a member of the Essenes. The principal sources on the Essenes include Philo and Josephus. They are also mentioned by the ancient writers Pliny the Elder, Silenus, Porphyry, Eusebius, and Epiphanius. Although the direct Hebrew or Aramaic equivalent of Essene has not been found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, ancient and modern authors have consistently used the Greek name to refer to this group with varying explanations for its etymology. Ancient literature regarding the Essenes is fairly abundant. Where the Essenes came from is unknown, and the meaning of the word Essene is a mystery. There is no Hebrew word for these people, only the Greek. According to the Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria, in his work, Every Virtuous Person is Free, they were above all things worshippers of God. They refrained from the ritual animal sacrifice that was common among the popular religious tradition at that time, instead endeavoring to make their own minds fit for holy offering. They lived in villages, far from major cities, and shared all resources equally with members of the community, including provisions and treasury. Interestingly enough, they shared many similar practices with the Pythagoreans. Among the different groups of Essenes were the Therapeutai near Alexandria, whom Philo described as specializing in healing arts. Health of body, soul, and spirit always figures prominently in the Rosicrucian tradition and its antecedents. 2 millennia passed from the time the scrolls were written until they were discovered in 1947. But what exactly are the Dead Sea Scrolls? The artifacts themselves are documents written with a carbon-based ink, usually on animal skins, although some are inscribed on papyrus. The Hebrew and Aramaic text were written, as they are today, from right to left. As was common with many ancient languages, there are no periods, commas, quotation marks, or any other punctuation, except for an occasional paragraph indentation. In some cases, there aren't even spaces between the words. The letters simply run together in a continuous stream. They are the most significant and oldest manuscripts that give historical authority to biblical texts and to the history of their time. As the story goes, in 1947, young Bedouin shepherds searching for a stray goat in the Judean desert entered a long, untouched cave and found jars filled with ancient scrolls. That initial discovery by the Bedouins yielded 7 scrolls and began a search that lasted nearly a decade and eventually produced thousands of scroll fragments from 11 caves. During those same years, archaeologists searching for a habitation close to the caves that might help identify the people who deposited the scrolls excavated the Qumran ruins, a complex of structures located on a barren terrace between the cliffs where the caves are found and the Dead Sea. The importance of the Essenes and their creation of the Dead Sea Scrolls is fairly clear, because the scrolls contain well over 800 separate documents recording biblical history, and because the amazing inhabitants of Khirbet Qumran created the scrolls before 100 CE. Tomes have been written about the scrolls and their Essene connection, coming from the late Second Temple period, a time when Jesus of Nazareth lived. They are older than any other surviving manuscripts of Hebrew scriptures by almost 1,000 years. But the Essenes were not the only esoteric school of thought to emerge at that time. The Greek religion was still a prominent influence, and though many of the pantheon's deities had begun to merge and find congruency with the deities of Egypt, there was a figure that emerged who had been a beacon of light since the 6th century before our era. Some of the early Christians regarded the Greek figure Orpheus as kind of a pagan saint, even confusing his image with that of Jesus. Both saviors appeared to be demigods of royal descent, who sought to refashion an existing religion in the interests of humanitarianism. Orpheus and Jesus both descended into Hades to rescue innocents confined there. Some mystical texts describe Orpheus as a real initiate who spent 20 years in Egypt and was a member of the mystery school associated with Memphis. Most people can recall two things about Orpheus: that he was a musician and that he went down into the underworld to fetch his wife Eurydice. His story is the archetypal myth of the power of music. With the lyre that was a gift from Apollo, Orpheus could move the hearts of everything in creation, from stones, trees, and beasts, through humans to supernatural and even divine beings. His music was even said to move inanimate objects, and his sacred songs reveal the greatest secrets of the universe. Orpheus was also said to be a well-respected theologian who told the origins of the universe and the deities through hymns and music. Along with Homer, Hesiod, and Pindar, he was venerated as the greatest of Greek poets. As a theologian, he was said to have been initiated into the mystery schools of ancient Egypt and brought these sacred traditions to Greece. Orpheus was definitely an important mythical figure, and an entire mystery school grew around his traditions, which included the figure of Dionysus, emphasizing each person's spark of divinity. This meant that the initiate no longer had to fear death, for the transition only meant a reunification with the whole divine self. One of the most revolutionary innovations developed by the Orphic scholars was their understanding that the Greek myths about the gods and goddesses should not be taken literally, but interpreted symbolically and mystically. Sometime during the later half of the 5th century BCE, an unknown Orphic philosopher and theologian wrote a substantial commentary on one of the Orphic theogonies, which described in mythological terms the evolution of the cosmos from an original unity to the great multiplicity we experience, and the commentary went to great lengths to discuss interpretations of the text. This was surprising for modern scholars to learn, since this kind of learned interpretive commentary was thought to have originated later in the academies of Athens and Alexandria, as Neoplatonism arose in the 3rd century CE. Though celebrations of Orpheus faded over time, he and his story returned during the period of the Italian Renaissance. Philosophers, poets, musicians, and intellectuals resurrected many of the traditions of ancient Greece. This period of intellectual and artistic rebirth was further enriched by the many ancient texts that resurfaced after the fall of Constantinople in 1453. The rediscovery of classic sources was spearheaded by Cosimo de' Medici, a 15th century Florentine ruler who sponsored the translation of a great number of classical works of antiquity from Greek into Latin, thus making a number of original sources available to the West for the first time in over 1,000 years. We know that Marsilio Ficino shared a deep affinity with Orpheus and shared many of his attributes. He sang the Orphic hymns, played an Orphic lyre with an image of Orpheus painted on it, was eloquently compared to Orpheus by those who knew him, and practiced what we would now call music therapy as a method for psychological healing and spiritual integration. After Ficino, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola also rediscovered the magical and theurgic use of Orphic hymns, saying, "Nothing is more effective in natural magic than the hymns of Orpheus, if the correct music, the intent of the soul, and other circumstances known to the wise were to be applied." The myth of Orpheus resonates over time as a powerful archetype because it demonstrates how art, poetry, and music can be used to bridge multiple realms of existence: mundane and celestial, living and dead, conscious and unconscious, chaotic and harmonious, masculine and feminine, and personal and cosmic. The bridge is said to be created by resonances shared between these realms through air, emotion, and imagination. According to the researcher and emeritus mathematics professor of the University of California, Santa Cruz, Dr. Ralph H. Abraham, Orphism survives from the time of Christ onward in the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. But in ancient Greece, that was just a small component of this whole religion of Orphism, which had its roots in the Paleolithic past. Orphism stressed a distinct standard of ethical and moral conduct. The Orphics abstained from eating meat and wore white, symbol of purity for cultivating the divine nature of Dionysus. What is most astonishing about the esoteric philosophy is that the lines the modern West likes to draw between science, philosophy, and mysticism are often absent in Orphic tradition. Know thyself. These words were inscribed above the portal of the ancient temple of Apollo at Delphi and are probably the most widely known aphorism from the ancient world. These words have become a cornerstone of Rosicrucian philosophy. Few traditions in the history of the world have exercised greater influence in their time or inspired more intrigue throughout the ages than Delphi. Originally, the site was called Pytho, being named after Python, the great serpent which guarded it before being slain by Apollo. Python was the son of Gaia and highly revered in the goddess worship. This may be why serpents were used so prevalently at the shrines, temples, and effigies. The serpent was the symbol of rebirth and regeneration for early Gaia worshippers. The origins of the site of the Delphic Oracle are shrouded in a mysterious cloud of history. The sacred women who gave the now famous prophecies were called Pythias, named for the slain protector of the oracle. According to legend, prior to historical times, a mythic Sibyl presided at Delphi. Her title, Sibyl, means prophetess or one who sees, and comes from the Greek word Sibylla, possibly from Semitic roots meaning ancient of God. The Sibyls were known throughout ancient Greece for their prophetic insights and profound knowledge. The divine source of prophecy and knowledge changed with each invasion that occurred in the area. As we peer through the veil of time, we see the struggle played out in the replacement of the original Earth goddess worship. There were at least 4 phases of worship in Delphi. First, there was the worship of the Earth Mother, Gaia, followed by Themis, goddess of divine order, daughter of Gaia and Uranus. Then Phoebe, a sun goddess, and finally Apollo, the sun god and god of music, poetry, art, cures, and prophecy. The Delphic tradition, which began in the mists of time but was certainly active by the 8th century BCE, officially ended in 394 CE with Roman Emperor Theodosius's edict that prohibited the practice of ancient traditions. By the 6th century, any remaining temples were forced to close. And yet, the prestige and mystery of the Delphic oracles continue today, especially with the new discovery of converging fault lines directly under the Temple of Apollo and the gases that can be found within. This has prompted a renewed interest with expanded and updated information from many sources. During its height of popularity, the Delphic Oracle was the most prestigious and authoritative oracle in the Greco-Roman world. History is written by the conquerors. Virtually all of the information we have about Delphi comes from the writings of the Greek conquerors that destroyed many of the temples and writings of preceding cultures at Delphi. The Sibyls were mythic, semi-divine women of pre-Olympian times, and the Pythian priestesses held an important role during the Apollonian and Dionysian worship. Both were the voice that spoke of the future as determined by the deities and brought wealth and power to Delphi.